In the case of the acoustic guitar, I'll put this back here for a minute. In the case of the acoustic guitar, the fingerboard should line up with the top of the bridge, like so. This is a straight edge here, which is laid on the fingerboard, and it should come directly right in contact with the top of the bridge, with the top of that wooden bridge there. And the saddle will determine exactly how high the strings will be off of that fingerboard. The saddle is going to be the determining factor in figuring how high the strings are off the fingerboard. And that adjustment is made here. If you find that the saddle is slightly too high, or the strings are too high, and the neck is straight and the angle is right and all those other things are fine, then you can take the saddle out, pull it out. They usually aren't glued in, and usually look something like this. And you'll take the bottom of it and shave the bottom of it off, say like on a flat piece of sandpaper, or you can use a file. A file would do fine if you just kind of rub it along there, or a belt sander if you're lucky enough to have one of those are fine. You'll want to just take the bottom of it off, leave the top curve in it, because the top curve is going to be what matches the fingerboard. The fingerboard has a curvature to it that you want the saddle to match with, okay? You'll also want to keep in mind that the bass strings need a little more room to vibrate. They need a little more room in their vibrations there, and the saddle will have to be raised up to accommodate for that. So what the saddle will look like is it'll be curved with the bass strings being just a bit higher, okay, or the treble strings just being that much lower. But remember that curve. If you don't keep that curve in it, then the center strings will be just lower or closer to the fingerboard than the outside strings, which is what we don't want. We want all the strings to be reasonably in line and reasonably the same distance away from the fingerboard. Okay, there's an adjustment that we can make on the acoustic guitar at the saddle that is also quite important, and that is the contact point needs to be firm here. The string, when it comes out of the bridge slot, comes out, and if the saddle is too low, or if the saddle is just almost even with the height of that wooden bridge, it'll just kind of graze across that saddle and not really make a nice firm contact there. In that case, what we can do is we can take a file, or in this case I'm using a Dremel tool, and I'm cutting a slot into it, right directly into the bridge, so that once the string comes out of that slot, it will glide along that angle there and come in contact with the bridge saddle. It's important to keep those slots a little smooth so you don't keep breaking strings there. The important part here is to get a nice firm contact on this bridge saddle here. If the contact isn't firm and if the strings are kind of flopping on that bridge saddle there, the sound will be muddy and buzzy and it won't be very clear. So that's one thing we need to consider. That's in the case of the acoustic guitar. In the electric guitar, the adjustment is made a bit differently, where we don't have a permanent bridge saddle. We have usually a floating kind of a bridge like this here that's adjusted with small thumb screws, okay? Some are adjusted with thumb screws, some have like little screwdriver notches cut into them. Some, like in the case of this G&L, have individual adjustments that are made with small Allen wrenches. I have my Allen wrench here. Now these things fit into these Allen screws, and what we'll do is we'll also want to keep the curvature of the fingerboard going, raising the bass strings up just a bit, as we've said before. And we've also got room in this adjustment here for the length of the string. We've also got room for the saddle pieces to slide back and forth. Now, you've often probably wondered why there's room for this kind of adjustment, and also why on an acoustic guitar the saddle seems to sit on an angle. This is because the intonation, or the way the guitar plays in tune, sets up much better when the the string lengths are a bit different and have a slight angle to it. Now this machine here, this is a strobe tuner, and it's used to electrically tune up these fine tuning adjustments here back at the bridge. And what I'm going to do in this case here, this strobe tuner will tell me exactly how far off I am on a particular note. And what I'm doing here is I'm playing the harmonic, which is the halfway point, the direct middle of the string, and then I'm going to fret the note, and that note should be exactly the same as the harmonic. Now your ear will sometimes vary for you. It can be pretty close, but this electrical device here will accurately read it and tell you exactly and visually what's happening, so you can adjust your adjustments, like on this guitar here, backwards or forwards as they need to be. They need to be exactly right if the guitar is going to have any hope of playing in tune with itself. Okay, so that's the story of the saddle adjustment. The next minor adjustment that we can make is on the nut, and for that we'll need a small miniature file, such as this one here. And this would probably be a good time to go to one of our drawings so that we can examine what's happening. We have, first of all, the vibrating string, and then we have the points of contact, the bridge, saddle, and in the case of this drawing we have the other point of contact being the nut. The slot is cut in the nut, and depending on how deep that slot is cut, that's how far the string sits off of that first fret. Can you see that first fret there? Okay, what I'm going to do here, this particular string is a little too far, and my fingers kind of cramp up when I play the first fret. So I'm going to cut the slot down and try to deepen how this string sits. Now I'm going to keep going back and checking it, because this is a very important thing. You don't want to go too far. Once you've gone too far, you've opened up a real can of worms here, where you'll have to take the whole thing out. You have to take the whole nut out and shim it from the bottom and then start all over again. So it's real important to just keep checking these things and make sure that you're not going too far. A good thing to keep in mind is examine whether you're dealing with a plastic nut or a bone nut or a brass nut. The brass and the bone, and sometimes in the ivory nut, is a little denser material, and the file won't cut into it as much as like the plastic. The plastic, if you're dealing with that, be real careful. Make a couple of strokes with the file, go back and check it, and then if the string is still too high, make a couple of more strokes. But don't go too far, because you don't want to be cutting all of your strings just because a few of them are too high. So this string here is still a little too high. Yes? I've got the phone. I'm going to keep filing this away and keep checking it. Now, your finger is a real good gauge here. Keep in mind that your finger, okay, can tell distances much or as good as your eye can, and it can actually tell distances like up to a 64th if you get it tuned up as well. So use your finger to tell you how far these strings are, okay? Your finger is a good idea. And let's also keep in mind that the contact needs to be made here. Just as on the bridge saddle, the contact needs to be made on the nut here, right at the front. So while I'm carving my slot here, I've got the file held at an angle so that the last place that the string hits will be right at the front edge of this nut here, right at the front edge. So I don't want it to graze across, I want it to make perfect contact like right at the edge here. Okay? And keep in mind also the curvature of the fingerboard. You're also dealing with that so that the middle strings will be a slightly bit higher than the outside ones. And also the same thing being true of the bass strings needing that much more room to move. Keep the bass strings a little bit higher than your treble strings, okay? So once we've come to the point of adjusting the saddle and the nut, we're just about done with all the adjustments that we can make and all the little things that can be done. If you're considering buying a guitar, look first of all, like we've done, sight down the fingerboard, see if the neck is straight, see if the rod can adjust it. If the neck is crooked and if it's bent, the rod might be able to take that out, okay? If the truss rod doesn't work on the guitar, you're probably in some sort of trouble, and I wouldn't buy the guitar, okay? The next thing to look for is the angle of it. If the neck is starting to come loose, if you're starting to get like cracks in this area here, I would consider a different guitar. If those things are right, if the angle is right, if the neck straightness is right, you can go in and do the minor adjustments like the nut and the saddle. And keeping those things together is kind of a minor-ish kind of a thing, and any repairman can take care of these little minor things like that. And it's also a good idea to change your strings periodically. I've had people come up to me and complain about their guitars not being able to play in tune and not play very well. And I'll take a look at the guitar, and I notice that the strings are like all grungy on it, and they haven't been replaced in years. And all it takes is for a person to just change the strings, and after they put the new set of strings on, they'll come back to me and they'll say, "God, what did you do to it?" And I didn't do a thing to it except just change the strings on it. The strings being new, they will help the guitar out a lot, not only for it playing in tune, but also for the intonation of it. So once you've checked like the straightness and the angle and that, you'll be able to tell pretty much what the story is on any particular guitar. Once you've done those things, you can have the minor things like your saddle adjustments or your nut adjustments taken care of, maybe by yourself or even with a repairman. If you're like doing some of these things, keep in mind to be careful and not to make any mistakes of like gouging into things, okay? If you're not sure of what you're doing, take it to a repair shop. Let me see. There's a few more things. Well, no, that's just about all the time that we have left today. I hope that maybe I've given you a little clearer understanding of how the guitar works and what makes it work. And maybe we should leave you with a slight melody here. And I wish you all just good playing and the best of luck to you. Goodbye.